the Farmland Exchange, the official podcast of CLHbid.com. Expert insights on buying and selling farmland in Western Canada.
Welcome back to the Farmland Exchange, the official podcast of CLHbid.com. I'm Devon Davidson, your host and digital media strategist for CLHbid. Today, we are going to be talking about inherent difficulties in appraising farmland. And joining me in that conversation, CEO of CLHbid.com, Roy Carter, and Alle Carter, legal and member of the executive team for CLHbid.com. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks, Devon.
To our listeners, quickly, before we get started, please take a minute to subscribe and follow the show on your podcast platform of choice. And let's get into it.
Perfect.
All right. So the first question I had was, why is it so hard to value farmland? It seems far less standardized than other forms of real estate. And who wants to answer that one, I guess?
I'll maybe start, Ellie. I think there's several reasons. One is the unit that we talk about, they're not the same. You know, it's not a unit of wheat. It's not a unit of canola. Mm-hmm. Or say in, diamonds, it's cut, color, quality, or clarity rather. And I think in carats, it's physics. Mm-hmm. It's science. And so, in that case, a diamond in Vienna or one in New York or one in Toronto, it's got, there's no reflector, no variance on the value because of location. Mm-hmm. It's all because of those variables. So basically, it's science. And with farmland, even if we ignore external factors, these units are all different. Every quarter of farmland to some degree is different, know, and sometimes it's in a microclimate, sometimes it's slope, and there's a lot of variables beyond even soil classification.
Right.
Whether it's in a sort of a no and hail area or whatever. So I think the first one is the unit, and then appraisals are based upon comparison. So what something sold for in the past. And from that point of view, it's inherently hard to appraise because it's not a movable object. So if you take, a combine at Dauphin, Manitoba, or a combine at Clarisholm, Alberta, the only difference on the same combine, same thresher hours, same engine hours, general same shape will be transportation.
Right.
Because arbitrage will bring those markets together. Mm-hmm. There's no arbitrage for farmland because it cannot be moved and you can't move a farm. So in the urban sector, you can't move a house in an urban sector, but you can move streets. Mm-hmm. So, a bungalow of 1,200 square feet in a city, generally they'll be close to the same value. There will be some external factors, parks and that type of deal.
Right.
But generally, they can be appraised pretty much like you appraise a movable chattel, where there's arbitrage, because there's arbitrage in a city where people can move around. If that bungalow is too cheap in one side of town, people will start buying there and bring that market together, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I think the biggest factor is that it's not a movable object, and people forget that, and appraisers tend to treat it as squares on a board, like on a checkerboard, as if they could be moved around. But because they can't be moved around, there's so many external factors that affect value that are really then hard to put a value on. And I often external factors can exceed the internal actual chattel itself or asset itself. You could take a quarter at Nipawin, Saskatchewan, come across on the same latitude to Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta. And, Fort Saskatchewan might be 3 times the value for the same land, same productivity.
Yeah.
And, that doesn't happen with automobiles or, with combines or anything that can be movable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We, to your point, and we always say, farmland is the only commodity in the world that can't be moved. And there, as you were saying, are so many external factors, even what, a farmer will pay to assemble that land to their farm base. Right. If I've had a couple really good years marketing my grain and I'm on the buy, and land comes up touching my land, there's no appraisal that can figure out how much more I'm willing to pay for that land.
That's right.
And that's, we often say that you usually know your buyers. They're usually, for the most, 50% of the time, farmers in the area usually, and it's what they're willing to pay to add to their assemblage is just something that you can't put a number on. And it really depends on what's happening in the economy, what's happening with commodity prices, and all these factors that are too difficult. It's just not a mathematical equation.
Yeah, it's not straightforward for sure.
And not that we would be, any better at coming up with a value in advance.
Mm-hmm.
People, though, mix up appraised value and market value. Mm-hmm. We don't sell stuff at appraised value. Mm-hmm. We sell it at the true market. An appraisal is merely a guess what land would sell for if there was true price discovery with world-class marketing. Mm-hmm. So we think that's us. Yeah. And sometimes that guess gets pretty wild. Because again, like what Alle talked about, it's all rearview mirror appraisal. It's what happened in the past. But you start adding in 2 crop failures, 2 years of drought, and maybe the year before was too much water, seeding into mud, canola peas maybe got drowned out. Farmers would generally take 1 year, maybe 2, but get 3 in a row in an area. Mm-hmm. And again, because it's not movable, you'll see all of a sudden, land will be affected as far as who's on the purchase. And, if appraisal just goes back about what stuff sold for, it doesn't factor that in.
Right.
You'll see even an oil patch, dead in a certain area or stop. It'll affect values in a certain area. Yeah. So, and where Alle's going with assemblage, within 5 miles of one quarter, there's 300 other quarters. But if you start adding quarters together, people will come a lot further to farm. Mm-hmm. And nowadays it's relatively easy to go down the road. You'll see farmers, the land will be spread out 60 kilometers. Sure. Almost unheard of years ago. Yeah. But they won't come for one quarter. They want an assemblage. But, 300 quarters within 5 miles, basically it's a square of the radius, double the radius and square it. So you got 1,200 quarters within 10 miles. So all of a sudden you quadruple your buyer potential. Mm-hmm. So, that's impossible to value what people will pay for that assemblage. And, we've had sales. We had one sale where a quarter was valued at $843, and we sold it for $1.88 million. Mm-hmm. And so more than $1 million over the appraised value, and it was farms on, and no investor, but that was purely an assemblage. That's what they were willing to pay the 2 farmers for that quarter across. If you would have listed that quarter for $1 million, chances are no offers. Nobody thought, looking at it, probably 843 was kind of what the market was.
Right.
But that day, with escalating tender with CLHbid, they basically stayed on, and they know somebody else is on the other side. Yeah. And they get affirmation the value's there.
Totally. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you guys ever find that appraisals sort of set unrealistic expectations for sellers, like based on these appraisals, it should sell for this much? And then there's also sort of that emotional attachment or the factor or the legacy factor that comes into play. Do people overestimate how much the land is actually worth?
I would say absolutely. Our, sometimes toughest job is managing those expectations at the forefront. And we always say we never overpromise and underdeliver. And mm-hmm. they'll come to us and say, well, I have an appraisal and my land's worth this. And we start digging it apart, and it's like, these are all the considerations that weren't taken into account. Yeah. And we're also not sitting here telling you what your land is worth. I always say, if anyone is telling you how much, your land's mm-hmm. worth, stop listening to them. Yeah. And so we're not here to say, as Roy said, that we can do any better of a job, but we let the market decide and have that starting bid. And appraisals, they take into account, all the comparables in the area, and sometimes don't even factor in, yes, that might have been a family relation sale, but maybe they don't speak. So maybe that is actually a little bit more accurate. Or maybe they are talking, and so it's, arm's length, pretty close. They probably got a bit of a deal. Or we've seen appraisals where there'll be a small little area of about, 40 acres or something, and that's appraised just about the same as the whole quarter because they think that, oh, this is a beautiful building spot. Someone's going to want this to build a house. Well, it's not like a commercial lot. That's kind of a pain for someone to haul the drill combine over for this small little sliver. It's actually not of more value than that quarter, but we understand farmland, and there's so many other factors that just aren't accounted for.
Yeah, I think that's a good comment. Your data out is only as good as the data in. It's a real problem for appraisals because a lot of it's over the kitchen table. Most farmland is not traded through MLS.
Right.
So they have a really big problem with data.
That was my next question, Roy. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry to get a...
No, that's perfect though.
But so basically, a lot of these deals, what else was involved, that type of deal, non-arm's length transactions, that type of deal. So you really get skewed. So like Ellie mentioned, we look at appraisals, often we don't, the client often doesn't have them. They realize that they want to have a sale. They know, they believe in our marketing and price discovery. So, you'd be surprised the number of farmers, when you ask them what their land's worth, I'd say at least 80% say, I don't know, which is the right answer.
Yeah.
So, most farmers don't have false expectations. Going back to your question there, can it cause a problem and give false expectations? Definitely. We, especially with estates, but and it's especially relevant if the husband and wife, say the farmers, have passed away and the kids are removed. But we got one example where a lady, totally sharp, and I mean, you can't take the farm out of these 85-year-old widows, right? They taken grain to town for their husband, the elevator, when he had to test at the elevator before you had a tester on the farm, and they get it. And they also know what crops have been growing on all these fields, right?
Yeah.
And so she was in her 80s, widow, and approached us to sell 2 quarters. And she'd had it appraised. And the 1 quarter was appraised at $915,000. It was a full quarter, full 160 acres. And that's another problem. Sometimes they'll just look at it at titled acres.
Right.
And then they'll average for the county, or RM. So, and her other quarter was less. It was 150 because the subdivision was out of it. So it was appraised at 870. And she said, want to sell both. I know for sure that the appraisal is wrong. It's got the big quarter as more money, and there's not a chance. And she was totally dialed in. She said, like, it's Solonetzik heavy. She said, like, we just couldn't really ever get a crop on it.
Right.
And the other quarter that's 150, she said that's going to sell way better. My neighbors want it, that type of deal. So she got it. So we, on her advice, and we also looked at it and we had our start set properly,
right,
opposite the appraisal. The quarter appraised at 870 sold for over 1.2 million, 1.25 million. So, and the quarter appraised at 915 sold for what it was worth at 565.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, she was like, yeah, we totally got it right. And, she said to me, if I would have made my sale decision on this appraisal, I would have accepted an offer on the good quarter for 870, left 400 on the table, or almost 400.
Yeah.
And my bad quarter wouldn't have sold for the appraisal because it was wrong. It would have sold for what you got it for, is 565. She got it. I mean, you're not selling it for over market value. So, that's dangerous, right? If you put 100% faith in that, and, easy to lose $400,000 or $500,000 on that by just bad data and making bad decisions, right?
Yeah, that's the Viking sale, correct?
Right.
Yeah, and that was a really interesting lesson for me because that was one of the first properties that I had droned, and I couldn't believe the difference in final sale price.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. So I don't know, given the inefficiencies of traditional appraisals, are there any other options for sellers really, or is it just, you know what, trust the appraisal or don't and move on? It just seems like there's so many considerations and it doesn't seem to work.
Yeah, I would say, just take them with a grain of salt. They're again a guess at the market. And, I guess we've seen enough, like Alle talks about, we'll go through them because sometimes you got to talk people down, right?
Right.
And sometimes you'll just find glaring errors. They'll include a quarter that maybe had an equestrian center. We had that happen. There was a quarter east of Calgary quite a ways, and they were using an example of an equestrian quarter by the Villeneuve Airport. And it was like, man, you're not in the same area, right? Mm-hmm. And you'll also find, so they adjust. What they do is they look at comparables, and then they do this adjustment. And it is like, you want to talk about no science. It's no science. They'll talk about, that quarter 10 miles away, we'll adjust for that 25%. Mm-hmm. That quarter is 25% less. And then we'll look at another quarter and we'll go, we'll adjust 12%. So they do all these adjustments. So say if a quarter, up north was 400, they'll say, well, we'll do a 25% adjustment. So this is 500. It has to be work because it's better.
Yeah.
But again, where they come up with that percentage from, it's a total roll of dice in my mind. As an example for adjustments here, if you look at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, soybeans, number 2 soybeans yellow is what that market price is. And if you've got 1, you adjust 6 cents up, and if you got 3, it's 6 cents down. So, adjustments should be there if you have a proper unit of trade. Mm-hmm. Like soybeans, number 2 yellow.
Yeah.
And that's science because there is professional graders of soybeans that can tell you that's a 3 or 1.
Sure.
But there's no way you can do it in an appraisal and get close.
Okay.
Okay.
Kind of even on the grading scale a bit. I was at the Lethbridge Farm Show last week, and a fellow came up to me. He's going through a divorce, and we just had a really interesting conversation where he's an agronomist, and he was so frustrated because through this divorce process, he had to get his farm appraised, to pay out his separated spouse, and it set this highly unrealistic expectation because the appraisal tells her that the land is worth this, and his argument was, you're comparing C soil, which is relatively really good, to my H soil that's gray wooded and just it's not at all the same producing land. It is not worth the same. And he said, I even went to court fighting about this, and they just couldn't understand why this appraisal is wrong. And he said, I'm so frustrated that they don't engage agronomists like myself or anyone. And so even when we come up with the starts on our sales, which are often quite a bit lower than where you think the land will go, but it provides a safety net for our client, we will engage agrologists and be like, go out, look at this land and tell us what you think, because we want to get this right. And something else is, oftentimes they might be looking at a comparable, north of the Peace River, comparing land right up against the Peace. And it's like, well, when you're right against the river, you actually have cut out half of your potential bidders potentially to the north because that river separates, and no one's going to want to haul their equipment across the Dunvegan. So factors like that just aren't taken into account. Or if the land is a budding crown land, yeah, that's nice, but that's also a limiting factor for this farmer to potentially grow because there's crown land next to him. And so things like that buyers take into account, but these appraisals just don't.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing smarter than the market.
Totally.
The market will figure out what it's worth. And there's so many variables to take into account, you wouldn't know where to begin to list them all. Like that getting boxed in That's where you'll see pockets, but the pockets are there generally for a reason type deal. We definitely, investors like buying on our site. They sort of see it as the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, where there's fluidity and true market price discovery. So they even help to bring that market, to make that market true. When you get investors from the outside, maybe that'll be on that one that's boxed in, that just want to invest in land and don't have to cross a bridge. They look at it a little bit different.
All right, the next thing we want to talk about here was assessing the impact of surface lease revenue on farmland value. It can add significant value, Roy, but it's not always easy to quantify. So can you maybe walk us through a little bit of why that is?
Sure. If the payment is right, it probably shouldn't add much value, because the idea behind the payment is to make the landowner whole for the inconvenience, right? So if the payment reflects the inconvenience, the land should probably be neutral. And, you can look at, these windmills, and it's, in our opinion, it's too bad. Years ago, in some of the provinces, target areas for well sites were in the middle of quarter sections. There's no more oil under the middle of that quarter than the corner, right? And so target areas were moved. Oil companies would just as soon be away from fence lines and out in the middle, nobody close to them.
Sure.
But, some governments forced them to the corners. It's funny somebody hasn't taken that on for the windmills. But some of these people don't realize that actually the income, the surface lease revenue from that windmill might be a huge negative. Some people might totally stay away from that quarter. Because, they think actually the, government may change, there may be irrigation districts change, and I might be able to irrigate that. And that dream, sometimes, of course, the story is better than reality.
Right.
But they'll build that in when they're bidding, but they won't when the windmill's out in the middle, where it could be just as easily be in the corner. And we all get that on some sales. You'll see nowadays, again, with these wind projects and solar projects, they come around and they sign up the farmer, and it's a big final number per annum if they exercise the option, but the option's just peanuts. So they tie this land up, and the buyer doesn't know what he's got. He doesn't know if they could exercise and get a solar farm, or if he can farm it.
Right.
But some of these farmers just want to farm.
Yeah.
And we've had sales where, we're on, but you tell your guy to go make a deal with a solar company to get that off, and either pay him a fee or whatever. Or if I'm high, I want to have an option to be able to write them a check to get rid of them, that option off my land. So that's kind of the other side of the equation. Too often I think appraisers look at it as, oh yeah, there's income there, right?
Yeah.
But often it's not seen as a plus for farmers. On the plus side, there's one that really stands out in Manitoba. We sold, it was an estate. And, again, you get the kids removed and they got this appraisal. Often the appraisal's done for probate purposes, which can be problematic because sometimes, the terminal return's filed based upon this high number.
Right.
And it doesn't materialize, right? So that's a problem in itself. But in any event, this land in Manitoba, a couple girls came to us, awesome to deal with. And the appraisal had the surface lease revenue equal to the value of the land. And it's like, wow. And so how did that come about, right? Because again, there was multiple wells, and which have a pretty major effect on farming. So, but they split it. So they valued the land based upon area sales, and with no discount for the adverse effect of the wells.
Right.
And then they come up with this crazy formula, and they had that people would invest. In this case, they said they would invest $221,000 to get $18,000 a year, which was the SLR, for 20 years. So, it'd be somebody be willing to invest $220 to get back $360 over 20 years, and it's kind of, I doubt it. So, I talked to the appraiser in this case, and I was like, what kind of math have you got there? And he says, well, yeah, just the return on investment, like putting it in the bank, 221, and you get back 360. And I said, yeah, what you've missed is you don't have the 221. You've bought that revenue stream. This is not putting 220 in no bank. You've only got this stream that's equals 360 after 20 years on wells that could easily be shut in. They were old wells.
Right.
And it was like, oh, okay. I just using that present value of that income stream, and I forgot they don't get to keep that 221, and which is a pretty major problem. Mm-hmm. If you had $250,000 to invest, you would generally think in 20 years. Most people think you can double it every 7 or 8.
Right.
I'm never that good at investing, but that's a general rule. So maybe they'd invest $250,000 to get 800 back. Yeah. But in this case, they don't get their capital back because they bought an income stream. Mm-hmm. And so that's how wonky. So here we had, these two girls thinking their $250,000 of income, but was the value of this income stream. And it's like, no, and it's probably almost neutral on your quarter because those wells are tough to farm around, right?
Right.
And as it turned out, in the end, it sold, and the land sort of sold for more than double than they expected. So the sum of the appraisal was pretty close, but we definitely got there a different route. Yeah, that SLR is a totally different deal to value, and I would say it's often overvalued.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my next question. Do you find buyers over or undervalue it? And you're saying they overvalue it.
Appraisers overvalue it. I think buyers totally get it right. Again, the market's not wrong. Mm-hmm. These guys are, 120-foot sprayers, GPS, all that stuff. This stuff, there's a payment. Those annual payments are for a reason. Mm-hmm. And, they'll pay a premium for those wide open quarters. So the negative kind of gets built in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Alle, anything to add to SLR? Or did I think Roy covered that pretty well?
He did a good job.
Okay. The next thing here is the value of aggregation. So how much does farmland value increase with larger assemblages? We've talked about this last. Roy, you've said many times that people will pay a premium for assemblage, right? And, maybe go through that a little bit. Like why? I think most people understand it, but just you've talked about it. Let's hear about it again.
Yeah, it goes back. I think we did an earlier podcast. Mm-hmm. Again, we're really a function of building something because of what didn't work. That assemblage was always missed on sale by choice at auction. And, they were familiar with one auction, and again, where they would sell by choice, and the first party took 4 or 5 out of like 32. Everybody else went for their vehicles, and the steal started, right? Because they were only willing to come, 30, 40 miles if they got it all or none.
Yeah.
So, that's again our on block to try and take that into account. It's a game changer what people will pay for the assemblage. Just economies of scale, moving down the road, setting up. That's a value. We don't know. We have no idea what that would be. So we don't profess to be smarter than appraisals. We're smart enough to know that it's super dangerous to rely on them because it is so far from a science. It's so far from valuing any other asset out there. Farmland is just got all those sort of issues or surround it that make it really, really difficult.
So there's not really an exact science. There's no way to measure the additional value of an assemblage, right? It's just there's so many other factors that need to be considered.
Yeah, and I think parceling really is important with this because, and we'll maybe talk about it a bit later, but when you get an assemblage that's almost like so massive, and that's trying to be sold as one parcel, well, you're not getting a lift for that assemblage. You're getting less buyers because it's almost too big for anyone.
Yeah.
And so that's where we engage everyone and we make sure to get that premium for the assemblage because the way that we package it matters. Maybe there's actually 2 on blocks because there's actually 2 assemblages that make more sense. And you could buy both, but you could also just buy one. And so it kind of goes hand in hand with that packaging that really matters where, everyone has a chance in round 1 But then the other guys who want to, pay a premium for that whole assemblage, they're kept honest by the young guys that were on in the first round, and then they'll pay, whatever that number is. And again, that's something we don't profess to know, but we just let them bid and let the market decide what that premium is worth.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we'll get farmers going together, so we'll have a farm and the neighbor will find out. Of course, we got solicitor-client privilege. Nobody finds out before the deal signed and it's on our site. There's no leaks. We're not real estate. But, then we'll get a call sometimes from the neighbor, and it's like, well, you guys are selling Browns. Can you sell ours? And we have a duty to our client. So we contact our client and say, the neighbor's called. They want to go to the party the same day, but you're going to have to approve it.
Right.
Because we got a potential conflict here.
Okay.
So we have a duty to go to them and get approval. And often they'll say to us, what do you think? And it's like, our answer is, we're not going to do anything that will hurt you. But have we seen lifts of 20, 30% by pooling quarters together? Of course.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, at some point, too, you get people from out of province.
Okay.
If you start getting in that north of 20 number, all of a sudden we open up Western Canada. That's big enough to set up, and big enough to set up a grain handling system and that, right?
So is there a point where there's diminishing returns for large assemblages? Like, I guess because we can't open it up to larger areas, like we have multiple en blocs maybe to appeal to smaller buyers. As it gets so large, you kind of limit your pool of bidders, correct?
Yeah, good question, Devon. We've had one like this. It was about 50,000 acres that we were dealing with the owner on over a year or so. That again comes to packaging. If you ever put that out as 50,000 acres and force the market, look out,
then that's a problem.
That'd be like I got 80 houses for sale in Saskatoon. I'm selling them to one buyer.
Right.
But we never do that. And we didn't end up selling that. It got sold. But, we in dealings with the owner, it was like, well, let's package this as really, two potential colonies maybe, two potential big en blocks. But then we're bidding out individually. So don't ever get smarter than the market. Let the market figure it out. But you need to allow the market then to bid on quarters, halves, multiple, and sort of packages they want.
Yeah.
If you ever try and crystallize that in advance, you're going to get it wrong to the detriment of your client. You just need to engage, like Alle talked about, the small guy, and they got a right to bid too, right? And most landowners like to treat, that guy down the road that's they probably play crib with or whatever. They would like to see it to go to some of these local smaller guys, right? And we make sure we engage them. And if there's somebody coming out of province, he's probably going to get wrung out and probably going to have to pay a premium if he wants it all.
Right.
Yeah. So to kind of sum up your question there, I think it does affect the value if you try to force a sale, as Roy mentioned, all in one package. And oftentimes clients will come to us and they say, I want to sell my whole farm together. Because often they don't want to be left with the home quarter, which is very fair, or something like that. And so that's where our packaging, we really take time to go, okay, how does this make sense? How is this being farmed? How many different players can we engage here? But then also do the en bloc to get that premium for the assemblage, but not forcing it just to one buyer. Because, we've seen land listed for years for 20 million for all these quarters. And it's like for every guy that has money, for that many quarters, there's 20 that have money for one. And so why not engage them as well?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll see. This is a bit off topic maybe, but we had one example where we went to sell some land in southern Alberta. And it was for a government agency. So they are obligated to get two appraisals. The one appraisal was double the other one. So we were talking to him, and it was like, so we just average, hey? They just said, oh, we just average to get the value, eh? And I was like, no, like throw them both away, right? There's no better chance that it's the average of those two than it's either one of those two. That just tells you, how difficult it is in that area to get any idea what that land's worth. So basically chuck them away and we'll find out what it's worth, right?
And that's where buyers and their financial institutions like our site, because it is fair market value on that day. And so they don't even, FCC won't even make their client go get an appraisal, because it's like, oh, we know that the land is worth what it sold for. Someone who's bidding 10,000 right behind them. So it also does alleviate some of that on the buyer and their financial institution as well.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, FCC is a really good, and nothing against the other lenders. I'm just a little more familiar with FCC. They've got a really good internal, basically sort of a quick and dirty value deal too. So yeah, I'm sure they cross-check it with our numbers, but there's no requirement for a formal appraisal out there.
Okay. Alle, you maybe alluded to it when you mentioned the home quarter, but what's the impact of fixtures on land value?
Yeah.
Like when you've got things like fencing and grain handling systems, I know we've talked about it in the past, but like, what's the impact? Does it have any value for bidders?
Yeah, I would say it's, in my opinion, sometimes it's overvalued, just because often when farmers are adding land to their assemblage, they already have a house, they have a bin system set up the way they want, and it's really of no value to them. If anything, they don't want to look after this extra couple houses, one house, this yard. People want things set up the way that they are used to running it. And so sometimes people might say, this is a great home quarter, beautiful big house, and oftentimes if it's just a home quarter and the improvements are worth more than the land, we'll be very honest and say, don't push it on sale day on our site. We won't maximize value, because the pool of potential bidders is just so much smaller. You'll get, wives who come in and don't like the cabinets the way they are, and they just want things specific. And so going to packaging too, or different options, that's where, if there's a home quarter that the improvements are not worth more than the value of the land, and we will take it, we want to maybe package that with another quarter so that our client isn't left with the home quarter, because often it is the toughest sell, and it does carry the most sentimental value, rightly so, for the client.
Okay.
Other options, such as subdividing the home right off. And we've often done it where we will have that subdivision approved. We'll do all the legwork ahead of time as the law firm, and we will post the conditions for registration on our site. So maybe you have to upgrade the septic, things like that. And then buyers see that as potentially a lift. Oh, okay, I actually don't have to look after this home. I can buy it, farm the land, and then sell that 20 acres off.
Separately.
Exactly.
Just through a farm realtor or something
Totally.
like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, let the market decide for sure there. If it's a home quarter with a big grain handling system and that, boy, we really try and hook that with a bunch of their land.
Okay.
You don't want to leave them with that in either, right? You want that to go with that land, because people, they've started grain handling systems. They don't want two of them. So whereas if it's more of a real nice farmstead with too much of a house, a real nice house.
Right.
Often we look at that and say, you got two buyers here. The buyer, and depends upon how close you are to a city.
Right.
But the buyer for your acreage is not the buyer for the farmland.
Right.
And in that case, like Alle talked about, we'll say, we'll take the farmland and maybe give them an option at closing, the high bidder an option to take the yard.
Right.
But if they don't take it, you keep it. Go ahead and list with a realtor, whatever that house.
Yeah.
We definitely don't want to be Walmart. When we got into this space, people asked us, if you're building something for farm and ranch, keep it farm and ranch. Don't start encroaching in, equestrian centers and acreages and all that. We're not afraid to tell people when they call. It's a problem across Western Canada, getting rid of farmsteads.
Yeah.
And, these equestrian centers and that, we'll get calls, and I hear you guys market around the world class. Do you want to take it? And it's like, yeah, no. It's we're built for a pent-up demand and to flush it out and maximize value. But you get that specialized, and you got to wait for the one party to show up.
Yeah.
They're not in a lineup, right?
So one other question I had was just around sellers and investing in improvements. Like, would you advise against that, just knowing that it's probably not of value to bidders? Like, in residential real estate, sometimes you paint the walls, you do shingles. Like, those are some of the things you look at improving. When it comes to, say, a yard, you would just sort of leave it as is. Don't worry about making any adjustments.
Totally.
Yeah. We've had, sellers out there repainting fences, retinning roofs, and it's like you're probably not going to get that back.
Yeah.
They likely might tear the house down, sell it off. Oftentimes they don't want it.
Yeah, and usually we'll often run into that with multiple kids owning, and mom and dad have passed away, and the place is a mess.
Right.
The yards, iron all over, used vehicles and that. And there's usually one of them that's been looking after it, and the other ones are pretty removed. And, they literally give up 6 months of their life trying to clean it up.
Right.
And does it get any more value? No. The buyers will get a hoe. You don't really want to tell them that, but
yeah,
shoot, shovel, and shut up, right? It'll get cleaned up. Nowadays, during COVID with iron prices, they were calling, people were paying big bucks to put it on their B trains. Let them figure that out. So definitely whatever you do there and whatever money you spend, I would say you have a good chance of getting it wrong. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all we've got for this episode. Is there anything else you guys want to cover in terms of appraising farmland?
No, just the final comment is, be careful. Don't treat it as the gospel. Far from it. It's not. It's a guess at what the value is, and we're not saying don't get it, but just be careful. Don't to not hurt yourself by relying on it.
And sometimes you might be pleasantly surprised too. If you let the market decide, oftentimes there's way more interest than what has been maybe considered in that appraisal. So it could have a real positive too for you. Yeah.
Yeah, from that point of view, and maybe we sort of touched on it, there's a real built-in incentive to underappraise good land. Farmers know good land. And they also know that's where the money is made. The land that'll get you 20% less of a crop, chances are you won't ever make money on it because your margin's not better than 20. Right. 10 might be the number. So there's a real incentive to overpraise bad land and not take all the negatives into account, and then underappraise the real good stuff. We see that pretty consistently, that they tend to average, and because they average, they put too much value on the bad stuff, not enough on the good stuff.
Okay. Well, Alle, Roy, thank you both for being here. That was great, very informative. Well, we'll see you next time, okay?
Thanks, Devon.
Thank you very much for tuning in. We appreciate the support. That's another edition of the Farmland Exchange Podcast. If you have any questions or topics that you'd like us to discuss on the show, please send us an email, info@CLHbid.com, or give us a phone call, 866-263-7480. You can also visit the page on our website, CLHbid.com/Farmland Exchange. Make sure you follow us on social media. Give us a subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope this has been a positive exchange for you. Take care.